Hello everyone, welcome to a mini-scratch, basically a BrainScratch update. Occasionally I will do these if I have updates to cases that I've previously covered. Of course, you can jump into the BrainScratch playlist to see my previous coverage of these specific cases. You're getting two mini updates today. One of them is a bit tough, and that's this one that we're going to start with. This is an update on the Kendrick Johnson case, and just in case you're unaware of what that case is, a young man that was going to high school in early January of 2013 disappeared, and a day later they found his body in a rolled up gym mat, and his body was upside down. And the big question in this case is, was it an accidental death where he was actually reaching for a shoe that belonged to him that was in the bottom of this mat? Or was there something more conspicuous that had happened, or something much more devious actually that had happened there? And I highly recommend, if you don't know this story, you check out the previous brain scratches on it. There's a lot of twists and turns. There's another family that kind of gets wrapped up in this. They get blamed a lot. They're looked at a lot. They pay a lot of prices for some of the choices that they have made throughout the investigation, and choosing not to participate in the initial investigation, which kind of raised suspicions around them quite a bit. That in itself could lead to a whole debate that, quite honestly, I've been having with certain people, and seems like it will never come to an end. And that debate is, if someone is harmed and you know them, will you participate in the investigation, or do we not trust our own law enforcement officials so much now that you would choose to opt out of participating in any investigation because maybe you'll be falsely accused, or something else could happen to you? I'm not really sure, but obviously from just how I stated that, you probably have a sense of what my opinion is. And you know, I look into a lot of cases where I'm very suspicious of law enforcement, but my gut tells me that if I was in a similar situation where I could have helped the investigation at all, or even participated just to rule myself out, I would likely do that. And I know many of you out there would choose to not to do that, so that you don't get tangled up in a potential mess of you know, becoming having false accusations thrown your way or something along those lines. But if there's anything we could learn from this Kendrick case, it's that sometimes if that's your intent, you're still not safe from that, because the public court is a very real thing. Social media is out there. People are going to talk. So I don't know. It's very tough. There's certainly a lot of things we could learn by looking into this case. But there have been some recent developments. So the police initially conducted a 4-month investigation. They concluded it was accidental. Kendrick's family did not believe in that, so they decided to press further. I'm not sure exactly who got the attention of the Department of Justice, but it was raised to that level. The Department of Justice believed that it was worth their time to look into this, and that investigation has gone on for about 2.5 years now. And there was some strange twists that happened in that. The original state attorney that was looking into this wound up resigning his post. That probably happened about a year ago, maybe a little less than a year ago. The next state attorney that it was handed over to also resigned his post. So now it gets handed to a third person, and she has finally made her conclusion, which we're going to go into here a little bit. So some real weird twists. Also, there was a civil suit, a couple of civil suits launched by Kendrick's family and the Bell family, the family that was largely accused of having something to do with covering up the real manner of Kendrick's death. And those suits had some weird twists. At one point, the Department of Justice investigation had asked the judge that was trying the civil suit to halt their discovery process because it might impede the DOJ investigation. The judge did not agree to do that, which seems kind of strange to me. And that was only maybe 6 months ago. So it seemed to me at that point, just looking from the outside and obviously not having any insight, that they felt like they were trying to discover something that might have been another piece to the puzzle, and they needed the court's help to not shake up that piece so that they could find it untouched. Obviously, that didn't happen. The civil suit was then retracted from Kendrick's family, but the way that it was done, essentially they could refile it within 6 months. And outside of that, the people that they named in their suit, which I think they had named almost 40 people, including the school district and some other officials, they have now filed a countersuit for all of their attorney fees, court costs, and all that related to the civil suit. Which, if the civil suit resumes, I don't know how that secondary trial goes, because I think the civil suit would have to conclude before they could determine if there was damages for court fees and lawyer fees and all that good stuff. But I don't know for sure, but I do believe that would change that second suit a little bit. So, what has happened? Many of you, thank you brain scratchers, have sent me a whole bunch of different news article links to the recent update. I've picked out a few that I'm trying to encompass just kind of the whole scope of what has happened on this update. So let's start with the article at AJC.com. And if you have watched my previous videos, you know that I'm a bit critical of the press coverage of this case as well, and we're about to step into another example here. Case closed on Kendrick Johnson death with no federal charges filed. Some might think that's a perfectly acceptable title. Personally, there were several cases related to this, and yeah, it does say there's no federal charges filed, but I personally would have named this the DOJ case is closed. I can't explain it, but I've never seen a case in all over 100 episodes of BrainScratch that I've done now where the media has been trying to end the story so quickly, time and time again. In one of the previous KJ episodes that I did, I even figured out that someone that was reporting on it almost exclusively in the local area formerly worked for the school. There has just been, it's been kind of weird to me. If we could separate Kendrick Johnson from the news coverage about Kendrick Johnson, I think we have two very separate issues going on here. And granted, there's a lot of people that believe there is racial motivation going on in this part of the country. Maybe that's affecting the news. And I think it affects it both ways. We're going to touch on a little example of that here later. But let's take a look at Christian Boone's article from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Federal authorities said Monday they will not bring charges against anyone in the death of Valdosta teenager Kendrick Johnson and declared the long-simmering case closed. Here's a quote. After extensive investigation into this tragic event, federal investigators determined that there is insufficient evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that someone or some group of people willfully violated Kendrick Johnson's civil rights or committed any other prosecutable federal crime, a statement from the Justice Department said. Accordingly, the investigation into this incident has been closed without the filing of federal criminal charges. Now, that's a direct quote, so I have to take that as they've typed it. I've seen some other information that I believed was also a direct quote from them that was a little bit more detailed, essentially stating that not only would they have to prove that Kendrick Johnson was murdered, they'd have to prove that there was a cover-up, and they would also have to prove that the cover-up was racially motivated. Now, this one is worded a little bit differently, so I don't know if this is a little change in position, but that's initially what I heard, that basically the uphill battle was so hard and so far to climb that it's very unlikely that the Johnson family would have ever seen charges come out of this in the first place. But it does make me think, when you look at the law enforcement's angle, they had this case closed within 4 months. Then it's raised to the Department of Justice. They review this case for 2.5 years and literally don't come out with much of anything. Not only do they not have charges that they can file, they're also not claiming to support law enforcement's position on this either. It's really, really odd. So you have this entity that puts a pause into this case for 2.5 years, literally tries to stop civil proceedings. And then at the end of the day, they come out with a conclusion that is largely inconclusive. Just from watching this, it's frustrating. It's really, really frustrating for me. I would have rather that they came out and said, hey, look, we found law enforcement acted appropriately. We found that their conclusion does seem to make sense with the evidence that we reviewed. We know for a fact that there was missteps in the investigation. The sheriff that was responsible for this investigation openly admits that they did not follow law by getting the coroner there in time. He was there 6 hours after the fact. And I think that there's this assumption then, well, it's just okay because the coroner wound up with the same conclusion as the police. Not necessarily if you're running a scenario where someone might be altering the crime scene to make it look accidental. That 6 hour window is huge, and there's a reason why there's laws for the coroner to be brought on scene at a specific time. We bumped into this a little bit too with the West Memphis 3 case where, you know, by the time the coroner gets there, people have trampled the scene, they've moved the bodies out of the water that they were in. It's just it's not a good way to process these crimes. So I really wish, if nothing else, the DOJ could have enforced that, hey, they did misstep. Just even note it. Don't charge the department, but at least acknowledge there were missteps. You know, we're going to fine the department or something like that. Just to make it known that you can't do this kind of thing. Because right now it does seem like a network of people that are once a network of administrations trying to cover each other up. And unfortunately in my life, I've seen that several times, and it's one of the things that really nags at me the most. Because administrations are supposed to be run by principle. They're not supposed to be run by individuals controlling their own personal interests. It then goes on to talk about how the Justice Department and their lawyers and investigators expressed their most sincere condolences to Kendrick Johnson's parents, family, and friends. And really, there's not much more to this article. It's kind of trying to, once again, put this case in the completed pile. And of course, the last thing in the article is once again pointing out that the Bell brothers have alibis. So, is this article necessarily slanted? Nah, I don't know. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but there seems to be undertones in these articles time and time again that make me uncomfortable. And this article, it doesn't peg that meter all the way to 10. Maybe it brings it up to a 2 or 3. Where is the unbiased reporting? And I know it is very, very hard in a case like this. I know because whenever I pop on that camera to talk about this case, I literally feel my face get hot. So I know even I'm struggling to remain detached and completely unbiased in this case. But when I find myself in that position, I try to do my best by reviewing 2 extreme points of view and understanding those. So hopefully I can at least try to understand that there's a middle ground between those points of view. So, and this court case is all done, right? That's it. Case closed. Well, maybe not. Let's jump over to CBSNews.com. And we can see the title here, Family Bewildered by Vague Findings in Son's Gym Mat Death. I have to include myself in that group of bewildered people. And right in the middle of the article here, the department's statement steered clear of saying whether its findings pointed to an accident or homicide as the cause of Johnson's death. And if that is not the root issue that you were investigating and should come to a conclusion for, I don't know what they wasted the last 2.5 years doing. That literally boggles my mind. If there was one question that they should have answered, it should have been that. They could have reviewed only the police case files and said, hey, you know what, looks good enough to us. We believe that this was indeed an accidental death. But they're not even doing that. It's a shame, because this leaves Kendrick's family in this position of still not knowing, still having authorities giving them mixed messages, and it gets worse, unfortunately. The teenagers' parents, Kenneth and Jacqueline Johnson, also came away with few answers after meeting Monday afternoon with federal prosecutors in Macon, says Marcus Coleman, a spokesman for the family. They're in a state of bewilderment, Coleman said Tuesday. The statement that came from the DOJ is very vague. Their findings were very vague. I would even say incomplete. We haven't really learned anything new. The parents voiced their frustration Monday during a news conference in Macon. Quote, it just pushed the dagger a little bit further, Jacqueline Johnson told reporters, adding, we've still got no truth. The Johnsons announced that they will refile civil lawsuits in the case that were dropped a few months ago, CBS affiliate WCTV reported. We're still ready to push forward. We're not stopping. We're not giving up because we know something happened to Kendrick Johnson. Kendrick was murdered, and they all but came out and said that they know he was murdered, but nothing to be done about it, his mother said. The article then goes on to mention that even their attorneys didn't come into this discussion, into the room with them, which I don't know. What country are we in where this kind of thing is going on? I do not get this. Their attorneys are not allowed into this conversation. And in the conversation, the point of 2 autopsies is brought up. And apparently, the Justice Department led Kendrick's parents to believe that the first autopsy, once again, the one done by law enforcement, might not be accurate, and the second autopsy, the private one that says that Kendrick was killed by some type of blunt force trauma that happened close to an artery of his, was likely more correct. I just turn into a bobblehead when I hear things like this. What the heck is going on in this case? It's unbelievable. Quote, they were adamant to Mr. Johnson that the second one was more accurate, Coleman said. According to Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, verbatim, the first pathologist got it wrong. Quote, Kendrick's death has not been ruled an accident, and Kendrick's death has not been ruled a homicide, Coleman said. He added, that still leaves the suspicion lingering. CNN had a reporter, Victor Blackwell, that was all over this case when it first came out, and he did some reviews, like looking into the videotape footage to see if it had possibly been tampered with. I believe at one point he was even named in a lawsuit. Seemed like he kind of went quiet around that, but now apparently he started talking about the case again. He has a tweet that I want to show to you really quick. We can see here on June 20th, he mentions that Kendrick's parents arrive at the U.S. Attorney's Office Monday to discuss the investigation into their son's death. DOJ closes the investigation into the death of Kendrick Johnson, quote, insufficient evidence to support federal criminal charges. We regret that we were unable to provide them with more definitive answers about Kendrick's tragic death. And here, this is the tweet I wanted to show you. Remarks at launch of DOJ probe into Kendrick Johnson's death. Investigation closes without the answers to the 4 questions. So this is apparently a quote from them at the start of this process. As part of that process, there are several questions that must be answered or confirmed. First, what was the cause of Mr. Johnson's death? Second, was Mr. Johnson's death the result of a crime? Third, if Mr. Johnson's death was the result of a crime, who committed that crime? Fourth, if a crime was committed, who has the jurisdiction to investigate and prosecute those responsible? So, right from the first question there, what is the cause of his death? And essentially, they have now closed this case out without giving a cause of death. I don't know. Ebony Magazine, who was also named in a lawsuit when they had an author that had written a bunch of articles. He had changed the names of some of the students. However, apparently that was not enough for the public to not figure out that he was talking about the Bell family. So I believe it's the Bell family wound up suing Ebony. Ebony pulled those articles down. However, they are once again writing articles about this case. Like Black Lives, Kendrick Johnson's case shows black deaths don't matter. In the first word of the article, progress. The article then goes on to talk about several different examples of the so-called progress that Black Americans have made in our country. You know, Barack Obama being president, Oprah Winfrey having her own network, but ultimately the author feels like that progress is basically just for show, and that the true racial tensions are still alive and well, that racism is still alive in America. And it's really tough for me to say that that isn't the case. I think, once again, I've spoken about this in other videos, but if we don't look inside of ourselves and understand what draws us to certain biases, why we respond to certain things the way that we do, we probably don't understand some racism that might live in each and every one of us. There is a great comedian named Bill Burr who does a bit specifically on how old people will all of a sudden become racist as they age and just not realize it. You know, times have changed, what's PC has changed, all of a sudden they're saying the wrong thing and they're labeled a racist. They don't understand it, but of course everyone else does. I think there's something to that. I think that it's a constant monitoring that we have to do of just being aware of where our feelings are coming from. It's a level of self-awareness that I'm not sure that a lot of people take up the task of or have the time for, or whatever the excuse is. But being blind to that, not being aware of it, is where I think some of these cases can crop up and some of these tragic events get handled in ways where it makes you shake your head. There's just nothing else I can say about it. I'm completely baffled at this outcome. We're supposed to trust these administrations. We're supposed to trust this country to do the right thing for its citizens. And in this case, I'm not saying that means come out and say that Kendrick was murdered and try to uncover this master conspiracy. If they truly believe that it was an accidental death, they should have stated that. It's just another spot where this family has been stuck without answers. And they're stuck in a process where they can't fully process their grief because they don't know it's weird. I don't want to say they don't know the truth because it literally comes down to two angles. But how do you process grief? Do you grieve on both of those situations and then come out the end and not care which one was the truth? I don't think any of us could do that. So I said it, I think, in every single video, and I'll say it again. My heart goes out to Kendrick's family. I hope they do refile their court case. I think that they should file it a bit differently. They kind of swung very hard in their initial filing. I think they were doing that because they needed the discovery process. They were hoping to find evidence to let them know what truly happened. If nothing else, to me, there seems to be an accidental death case here. The school should be somewhat responsible. You're talking about a room that had multiple cameras not functioning properly, gym mats, which, if I recall correctly, some of those mats actually have warnings on them from the manufacturer about not storing them in that manner. I think there's certain aspects that they could look into for a possible wrongful death suit. And I don't know if the new filing will be angled a bit more that way rather than trying to uncover the big conspiracy. I'm really not sure. But in any case, I hope they get to the other side of all this and find some way to process the truth for themselves and then continue through their grieving and hopefully come out the other side stronger people for it. I know I'm sure it's a far sight from where they are now to think about that, but I just want them to know that there hopefully is some light at the end of the tunnel of all this. But I do believe that they need help, and I wish that it was the DOJ that would have done something here to help answer that question for them, if it's the answer they wanted or not. But it didn't come out that way. So, brain scratchers, please use the comments below to discuss this. I know this is a very tough issue to discuss, but I would appreciate if you all remain respectful to each other and the differing opinions that happen around this case. You guys have done a great job on the earlier installments, and I've struggled myself in terms of responding to people that are very strong in certain ways. But I think what we have to remember is that we are all one community here. We might have different thoughts and feelings, but we have to figure out how to move forward together on this case. So thank you so much for joining me on this mini scratch. There is another one out today, so if you want to learn a bit about where the Terry Missy Beavers murder is currently at, please be sure to check that one out. I've got all the updates that I could get together for you. And if nothing else, I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Thank you for spending some time with me here on the Geek and Dorks channel. Take care.